Hey everyone, welcome back to my Logic Pro 11 Mixing Fundamentals course. Now that we've made our first round of final mix revisions, it's time to master the track. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to use Logic's Mastering Assistant to master your own songs. I'll show you how to create a fade out for your song if your song needs one. And I'll show you how to bounce your mix as an audio file. And I'll also explain what dithering is and how that plays into the bounce. Okay, so let's load up Mastering Assistant. What you'll see on your stereo output here is a Mastering Assistant insert. And if you click on this, it's going to engage the Mastering Assistant to analyze your track. Now, one important thing about the Mastering Assistant is if you have your cycle range engaged, Mastering Assistant is only going to analyze this portion of your song. However, if you don't have Mastering Assistant active, it will analyze your entire track. So all you have to do is click on this Mastering Assistant insert here, and it'll take a moment and analyze your track. Okay, so it took about a minute there to analyze my track. And there are 6 main modules in Mastering Assistant that will help you master your music. The first is an auto EQ, and what this auto EQ does is it analyzes your track and then intelligently applies boosts or cuts at certain frequency ranges based on that analysis. And you can add as much or as little of this auto EQ in as you like. Additionally, you can make manual EQ adjustments with this low shelf, a mid-band peaking filter, and a high shelf. For each of these, you can just double click to reset them. And you'll see the parameters down here for the frequency and how much gain you are applying. Unfortunately, there is no Q control for these, so you can't control the bandwidth or the slope of the shelves. There's a dynamics section that has 2 different modules. The loudness knob essentially just increases the gain of the track, but what it also does is it automatically applies a limiter with a -1 dB true peak, which is pretty standard these days for masters that are going to be on streaming platforms. And there's also an exciter built in. There are no controls for the exciter itself other than turning it on or off, but the loudness knob does affect how the exciter is applied. There's also a loudness meter here that we'll come back to in just a bit. And down here at the bottom, there is a spread module. This has a stereo imager in it that allows you to make more out of the stereo width of the track, or you can narrow the stereo width of your track. And to keep an eye on your phase issues and mono compatibility, there's a built-in correlation meter. You can also click the reanalyze button if you feel like you didn't get a proper analysis or maybe you just had a small section selected. You can reanalyze any section you want, or you can reanalyze the entire track. And Mastering Assistant also has 4 character modes, and these character modes affect the EQ adjustments, the loudness and exciter adjustments, as well as the spread adjustments. So they completely change the character of the Mastering Assistant depending on what mode you select. So clean is going to give you a fairly transparent result. It's going to give you like transistor style processing with minimal coloration. Valve will simulate tube-based processing, which can get you some more warmth, some more depth, and even some more saturation. So if you find that the track you're mastering just doesn't sound big enough, or doesn't sound saturated enough, Valve is a good option for that. Punch is a transient-focused mode that will give you a more aggressive processing. This accentuates the transients in the mid-range to give you more impact and, as the name implies, more punch. And transparent is going to be the most transparent, the most clean mode. I recommend starting on transparent because this is going to give you the least amount of tone coloration. Okay, so let's start by resetting everything. There we go. Turn off the exciter, and let's just dial in our auto EQ and our 3-band EQ adjustment.
Now that you're sober, don't tell me that it's over. Don't turn this ship around and tell me that you can't get one more day. Don't ever tell me why. Don't you ever tell me why. 'Cause I don't want to know. I carried your heart when you needed me. That's just how our love was meant to be. I
And you can bypass your custom EQ settings down here if you want to hear it with and without those 3 bands in. I just gave it a bit of a bass boost just to reinforce the bass guitar a bit. I added a mid-range boost to kind of bring out the vocal range. And then I also stepped up the high end a bit just for a bit more air and clarity. I don't recommend using extreme settings here because that can throw your whole mix off kilter. I recommend using more conservative settings here. Just a little bit can go a long way here. All right, next up, let's throw in the exciter and hear what this sounds like with and without the exciter.
Now that you're sober, don't tell me that it's over. Don't turn this ship around and tell me that you can't get one more day. Don't ever tell me why. Don't you ever tell me why. 'Cause I don't want to know. I can't read your heart.
Now, keep in mind, the exciter is going to sound different for each character, but once we dial in all of our processing in transparent mode, we're going to cycle through all 4 characters to see which one we like best. I do like the exciter in, but it is adding a little bit more top end than I'd want, so I dialed back my custom EQ in the top end just a little bit. Next, let's head over to the spread section. This will just add stereo width if you pull this over to the right, and it'll narrow the stereo width over to the left. Because this is not a multi-band imager, you want to kind of play it safe here, because if you pull your width up too much, the side material, like the guitars and stuff, are really going to sound cool, but this can completely trash your mono compatibility, and it can also make things like your kick drum and your snare drum and your lead vocals not sound as focused. So I generally like to apply a little bit of width, but not too much width.
Now that you're sober, don't tell me that it's over. Don't turn this ship around and tell me that you can't get one more day. Don't ever tell me why. Don't you ever tell me why. 'Cause I don't want to know. I can't read your heart.
I also recommend, after you dial in your width control, to add the gain plugin to the channel strip. And what I recommend doing is clicking the mono button on and off a few times just to hear what your mix actually sounds like in mono.
Now that you're sober, don't tell me that it's over. Don't turn this ship around and tell me that you can't get one more day. Don't ever tell me why. Don't you ever tell me why. 'Cause I don't want.
And if you set the gain plugin to mono and really crank up the width or pull down the width, you'll hear how it affects the side material. With a lot of width, you're going to hear that the guitars on the sides are going to end up having more phase cancellation in mono. And so again, this can destroy your mono compatibility. So try to find a sweet spot where you're not losing all of your side material in mono. So let's go ahead and put this in mono, and I'll move this around so you can get an idea of how the stereo width affects your mono compatibility.
Now that you're sober, don't tell me that it's over. Don't turn this ship around and tell me that you can't get one more day. Don't ever tell me why. Don't you ever tell me why. 'Cause I don't want to know.
And then when we get to the chorus, the same thing will happen with those big backing vocals. You can start to lose some of your side information if you add too much stereo width.
I can't read your heart when you needed me. That's just how
So not only are the backing vocals starting to disappear in the mix, our phase correlation is dropping below 0, which we don't want. So let's go ahead and put this back in stereo and find a sweet spot, maybe around 0.4, 0.3, somewhere in there.
I can't read your heart when you needed me. That's just how our love was meant to be. I keep on tearing through your tragedies. I took the brunt of your shame and all your misery.
Yeah, and I decided to dial it back even a little bit more because we're starting to lose some of the backing vocals in mono. Okay, so before we choose a character mode, let's dial in our loudness level. Now, the way loudness is measured is in LUFS. That stands for loudness units relative to full scale. Some people just call this LUFS for short. Now, most streaming platforms will tell you that their standard for loudness levels is around -14 LUFS with a -1 dB true peak. That does not mean that you should be mastering your music at -14 LUFS. Think of -14 as a minimum loudness standard, not the level that you should be shooting for. And LUFS are expressed as values below 0 typically. So the closer you are to 0, the louder your mix will be perceived. Now, the loudness measurement will be different for every song I work on. There's not like a number that I always shoot for. It depends on the genre of the music, how dense the music is, and the instrumentation. So like an acoustic track with just a couple of acoustic guitars and a lead vocal might be around -12 or -11 or even -13 down in that range. Whereas a rock track might be around -10 up to -9, or a pop or a hip hop track might be up at -9, -8. The goal here shouldn't be to set your loudness as high as possible. It should be to get your track up to a professional loudness standard. So when you play your track against another professionally produced track, that the levels aren't way off. However, the caveat here is that the louder you push your track, the less clear your track is going to sound. So you end up losing clarity. So it's a trade-off. You want to push your track loud enough so it stands up against professional masters, but at the same time, you don't want to push it so much that you lose all clarity in your mix. MSI stands for momentary, short-term, and integrated. So we're going to be looking at the integrated loudness level for our measurement. And generally speaking, to get a more accurate reading, you want to make sure that the track plays for a good amount of time, like 20 or 30 seconds to get an accurate reading. But while I'm making quick adjustments, I may only listen for 10 or 15 seconds. So what I'm going to do is click start. That's going to start monitoring for the loudness level. And then I'll pull up the loudness knob until I get enough loudness, but don't get so much loudness that the track sounds unclear.
Now that you're sober, don't tell me that it's over. Don't turn this ship around and tell me that you can't get one more day. Don't ever tell me why. Don't you ever tell me why. 'Cause I don't want to know. I carried your heart when you needed me. That's just how our love was meant to be. I keep on tearing through your tragedy.
And while you're playing back the track, you can click the reset button to reset the measurement because the integrated loudness level will change over time. I recommend going to like the loudest section for this measurement. So let's jump into like maybe the bridge breakdown section here.
Through blinded eyes, can you finally see the hell you put me through? I carried your heart when you needed me. We fight this undying war. I carried your heart when you needed me.
Okay, I don't feel like I'm losing too much clarity at -9. Let's maybe jump over to the guitar solo section. That's another pretty loud area. Yeah, the solo section is probably going to be the loudest section of the track. We're clocking in at about negative 8.4 there. Let's also listen to the chorus one time as well.
I carried your heart when you needed me. That's just how our love was meant to be. I keep on tearing through your tragedies. I took the brunt of your shame and all your misery. It's just a goddamn shame that you cannot see. All that is good for you is just as good for me. I gave you everything and you left me in the cold.
Okay, yeah, that's a comfortable level there for me. I don't really want to push it too much more because, again, you start to lose clarity. Okay, so let's actually go to the second verse here, and let's toggle through all 4 of these character modes and see which one we like best. Transparent is going to be the most transparent and will impart the least amount of color on your track. So let's go up to clean, which is, again, a more transistor-based character. So you can hear there is a very subtle difference between transparent and clean, although both of them are pretty transparent sounding. Clean does have a little bit more of like a roundness to it. Again, think solid state processing, transistor-based processing. Let's try out Valve, which is probably going to sound very saturated, and it's going to have that like tube character to it. Yeah, it doesn't sound bad or anything. You know, the top end is a little more hyped. The track overall just seems to have like a big lift to it, but I think it's a bit too much for this track. This song is already really dense, so I think the Valve mode might work better for a source that's a little bit more clean to begin with. Okay, so let's try out punch mode, and then I'll cycle through all 4 character modes uninterrupted.
Would I embrace fucking nothing but this love shoved in your face? Shove all your problems under the bed and act like we're not broken. There's nothing left to hide. I carried your heart when you needed me. That's just how our love was meant to be. I keep on tearing through your tragedies. I took the brunt of your shame and all your misery. It's just a goddamn shame that you cannot see. All that is good for you is just as good for me. I gave you.
Yeah, I think ultimately I like the transparent character the best. It's preserving the detail in the top end the best to my ear, and it's not messing with, my mix balance. Okay, so one other thing you can do here is if you want to hear the processing that Mastering Assistant is applying to your track without hearing a loudness difference, because we're putting a limiter on here. So if I just bypass the track from here, you're going to hear a huge volume difference between Mastering Assistant being on and it being off. So there is a button here called Loudness Compensation, and you can bypass the processing right here inside of Mastering Assistant. And the loudness compensation will make sure that the input and output signal are somewhat matched, so you're getting a better approximation of what's actually happening in the processing rather than just hearing your track louder. And then you want to make sure you turn off loudness compensation after you're done. And there's nothing stopping you from adding additional plugins before Mastering Assistant. For example, here I'm going to use the linear phase EQ to add a little bit more body to the low mid-range of the mix. And typically when you're doing mastering work, you want to use a linear phase EQ because it reduces the amount of phase interactions between the bands. Whereas something like the channel EQ is going to cause additional phase interactions between the bands, which can color the tone of the mix. Okay, so next, let me show you how to create a fade out for your song, if your song needs a fade out, that is. So at the end here, the outro section is just the instrumental riff after the chorus. And the chorus. But at some point after that final vocal tag, we want to fade out the track all the way to here. So the way I recommend doing this is to put your master VCA in the tracks area and do the fade from here, not from the stereo out. So what I do is I right click or control click on the master VCA, select create track. It's going to put it out here in the tracks area. Let's drag it up to the top, press A to bring up automation, and then just create a couple of automation points. Fade it down, just like so. And then you can also use your automation curve tool to create more of like an exponential fade out shape. I don't want to do like this. You definitely don't want to do this. But what I'll do is I'll put just a little bit of an exponential curve on it. And then I just have to determine where I want the fade out to start at. But you always want to make sure this is at 0, and then it goes all the way down to negative infinity. Okay, so let's bounce out our track. Now, with a final master bounce, you kind of have to be smart about where the track comes in at and where it ends. I typically like to leave a little bit of space between the beginning of the track and where the first sound or the first note comes in. Now, this song does start with this faded in effect, so we're probably okay to start the track right here at bar 1. But typically what I'll do is I'll grab this little guy right here and pull back. And this will give you a 0 bar, and you can start the bounce range right before bar 1. So let me just hit Command A to select everything, then Command U. That'll set the cycle range around the selection. And then what I'll typically do is just kind of pull this a little bit forward just to give it a little bit of a buffer. It's not as big of a deal for this song because this starts with this effect that fades in. But if we were to start the song like right here, we wouldn't want the bounce range to be right there at bar 6. We'd want it to be a little bit ahead of bar 6. So just keep that in mind as you're bouncing your masters. And then at the end, we also have to determine where we want the end of the file to be. Typically, what I do is I wait until the very end, and then I count to like 3, and that's where I end the song. So let's just give it a listen here. 1, 2, 3. And that's where I set my bounce range. So let's grab the end of the cycle range and pull it right there. And let's go ahead and bounce our track. So I'll hit Command B. PCM is what you want for sending your track off to distribution. This will be things like WAV files, AIFF files. Either of these will work, but I typically go with a WAV file. You can also bounce an MP3 if you like. If you need to email a smaller file to someone, you can bounce an M4A, or you can burn directly to a CD if you're still doing that. You should see that the bounce start and end points match your selection. For the mode, we're going to select offline, but if you're using any sort of real-time mixing hardware, or you're using any hardware synthesizers, and you're actually using them in real time, you'll want to use the real-time bounce, which will actually play the track all the way through in real time. Since we're not using any hardware, we'll use offline. And then you can choose to normalize your track or not. As long as you mixed and mastered your track properly and your stereo output doesn't have a bunch of clipping on it, you should select off. I'll go with a WAV file since that's the most standard type of uncompressed audio file. You can choose between 24-bit or 16-bit for distribution. There are certain distributors like CD Baby that only take 16-bit files, whereas others do take 24-bit files. Now, if you're bouncing to 24-bit, you do not have to do anything down here with the dithering. You can just turn it off. That is if you record it at 24-bit. But if you record it at 24-bit and then you're bouncing at 16-bit, anytime you go from a higher bit depth down to a lower bit depth, you want to turn on one of these dithering options. Dithering essentially adds a low-level noise to the audio signal, and this helps to preserve detail when reducing the digital audio word length. Hence the term power dithering. This stands for psychoacoustically optimized word length reduction. Again, you only have to use dithering when going from a higher bit depth down to a lower bit depth. Changing the sample rate alone will not require dithering. There are 3 power modes and then a 4th mode, UV22HR. In short, Power 1 is recommended for spoken word or solo instruments. It also gives you the lowest noise floor. Power 2 and 3 add additional noise shaping. So Power 2 is recommended for music with a moderate dynamic range. Think pop, rock, or electronic music, and really any modern music genre. And Power 3 is recommended for music with a very wide dynamic range, like orchestral music, jazz, chamber music, etc. UV22HR is an additional dithering algorithm developed by Apogee that also adds noise shaping, but it's particularly great at preserving high frequency detail. So for a rock track like this, I'm going to go with Power 2, but as I always say in my videos, when it comes to dithering, no one ever ruined a mix by not dithering. And in most cases, you probably won't hear much of a difference, if any difference, between these. We also want to make sure to change the sample rate to 44.1 because most streaming platforms do not accept 48 kilohertz files. Although if you plan on using your song for video, it also helps to bounce a 48K version as well. And then the format is split or interleaved. You want interleaved because it means that the left and right files will be joined together in a single file rather than being split into individual left and right files. Okay, so I've got everything set the way I want. I'm going to click OK. By default, this will go to your project's bounce folder. So I'll just give my song a name, and I'll call this Master V1. I always label my master files because almost every single time I mix and master, I'll go listen to the track a few days later on fresh ears, and I will decide to make adjustments. This also makes it really easy when I'm collaborating with someone or working with a client. They can refer back to previous masters, like, you know, Master V2 sounded better than Master V3, or can we grab this out of Master 2 and bring it into Master 3, etc. Okay, so the song is bounced. Let's go to our bounces folder. There it is. Let's just give it a listen to make sure it sounds all right.
Now that you're sober, don't tell me that it's over. Don't turn this ship around and tell me that you can't get one more day.
Let's go to the end and make sure that the fade out is there.
You left me in the cold.
Okay, there we go. We've bounced out our first version of the mix and master of this track. The next video will be the final video for this course, where I walk you through some final revisions that I make to this track. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to see more content like this. As always, thank you so much for the support, and thanks for watching.